Welcome to Obey Your Strengths with Gallup Certified Strengths Coach, Kersten.
Welcome to Obey Your Strengths. Ron Soos is our guest, and he is a learning and development leader at a Fortune 500 company here in San Antonio called Endeavor. Thanks for joining us today, Ron.
Thanks for having me.
I invited you here because you are my resident expert and fun guy around strengths. And you and I spent many a years working at Rackspace Hosting, learning and leading the strengths movement at Rackspace.
True.
So I wanted you to come on the show and share with our listeners all of your wonderful strengths knowledge around how to embed strengths within an organization and talk about some of the stories that you have.
Okay.
So thanks for being here.
You bet.
Ron, your top 5 strengths. Let's start where we start every podcast is with my guest's top 5 strengths. Tell me what they are and a little bit about each one so we can understand how they manifest themselves in you.
Well, that's good. Okay, so my top 5: adaptability, communication, positivity, strategic, and woo. And they've been that way my whole life, if I really think about it, you know. Adaptability for me is about, being open to change, certainly, but it's about, for me, it manifests in almost, it's a need for change for the sake of it. Like, for example, if I get tired of driving the same way to work every day, I'll change it, just for the sake of doing something a little different. I love change. It's not, I think like most people, I don't like to have change done to me, but I do like to initiate change in things. Mm-hmm. Communication, it's... that's a big deal for me. I really love public speaking. I love teaching. That's kind of got me into the job that I'm in now, and I really enjoy like being in front of people and communicating that way. But also, there's a thing that a lot of people say about communication that really resonates with me is that like when you write an email, you have you choose just the right phrasing of words and that kind of thing. Like I'll back up an email and do it again and again to get the words just right. Mm-hmm. That's communication for me. Positivity, for me, manifests in my just unwillingness and my irritation and my resistance to negativity. I just don't like to be around it, And when people are kind of in a funk and they're very negative about something that's going on, I just, I'm like, ugh, I want to get away from that. So that's how I see positivity coming out. Strategic, I love this about strategic in that it is... It's about pattern recognition and seeing the big picture, and that's very much how I see things. I'm a if we can talk about the Myers-Briggs, right? The MBTI. I'm an ENFP, and that N, that focus on seeing the big picture and the why behind things really resonates with me and connects really closely with strategic and StrengthsFinders too. So that's how I see that one. And then for woo, that one's that's all. It's all over me all the time. I enjoy the challenge of meeting new people. I love the second phrase in the long description of woo, where it says you enjoy the challenge of meeting new people and getting them to like you. Mm-hmm. And that, I think, was the most difficult for me to be honest about when I first started into StrengthsFinder, that piece about getting people to like me and how important that is for me. And then if I feel like they don't like me, I got to figure out what's behind that. And how could you possibly not, So that's my top 5.
I agree with you. How could anyone possibly not like Ron Soos? When I see and I think about you and have known you for years, when I think about your positivity plus woo strengths coming together, I think that you're like a party in a person. You're a walking party. Mm. And usually you bring the energy up. It's funny how you describe your positivity as you want to get away from negativity. I think you add energy to anything that you do and any groups you're in, and your presence adds energy, and that's what I see your positivity at.
Yeah, dude. Okay, I'll give you that. And there's a section in the description of positivity too about finding the humor in things, and so that's something that's always important to me. I'm always cracking jokes and trying to see the lighter side of anything that's going on. So that's true. Okay,
well, what year did you discover your strengths?
That would be when I joined Rackspace in 2007.
Okay. All right. And that's when your strengths journey started. Mm-hmm. And you were a salesperson at that time period, correct?
That's right. Yeah. I came into sales, and I distinctly remember going into the orientation that we had there at the time. We called it rookie orientation. And Graham Weston came in, and he gave the talk that he always would give about strengths. And it literally changed my life. Like, I was thinking about, just like most people, about how we get better at the things that we're not good at. And, I was thinking about how I have spent my entire life trying to, try to bring up my weaknesses, I guess, and to use a vernacular. And then when Graham gave that talk about that's not the way it's going to be here in this culture at Rackspace, we are going to focus on what you're good at doing rather than what you're not good at doing. It blew my mind. And you know what? I love to tell this story too about it. At that time in my life, my wife and I were arguing about getting a housekeeper. And there was just something about we'd spend all of our time cleaning the house on the weekend. So we both work all week long, and then we get to the weekend and we're cleaning the house, and we get so frustrated with that. And then Graham told this story in that Rookie O about laundry and how he and his wife hated to do laundry. And so then one day they decided, you know what? I don't like to do laundry, but there are other people who do like to do laundry. Let's give those people an opportunity to be successful. And then I went home that day and I told my wife, I was like, hey, I just heard this really great talk about, focusing on your strengths, and we're getting a housekeeper. And then she fell in love with StrengthsFinders that day too. So, yeah.
I don't blame her. That's an awesome story. Thank you for sharing that. That's really good. I think about those folks who joined Rackspace at that time, and when they were sitting in Rookie O, there were some of those promises sort of made that they were going to get to play to their strengths. And I've heard stories of people say, this is after I realized what my strengths are and that I'm going to get the opportunity to play to them in this working environment. Maybe I'm actually going to figure out what I'm really good at or what I was really meant to do, or I'm free to be me. Because in my previous work life, I was focused on liabilities, and not anymore. Here at Rackspace, I can be focused on strength. Was that a major part of what turned you on to wanting to be a strengths coach whenever you came to the record engagement team, after you'd been in sales for a few years and you moved to HR?
Absolutely. I think when I joined the engagement team and started working with people individually on their strengths, that light bulb moment that happens to people that when they realize that it's not about self-help, it's not about trying to work and get better at something that you're not good at. It's very freeing in that you get this permission to be great at some things that you really love, and you also give yourself permission to be not so great at some other things that you don't really care about. That light bulb moment that happens to people that's what really charged me up about StrengthsFinders. That watching that happen with people and watching that transition and belief that would happen with people was super energizing to me. I have developer in my top 10. And so that one really resonates with me too. Like helping others to get better, helping others just kind of see the light, see, some different ways of looking at things. That's really energizing for me. So yeah, absolutely. That's what it was.
And to give our audience and listeners some context, we together, you and I, along with other members of the HR team, owned the Strengths program at Rackspace for a series of time, right? A period. And we had lots of people beating the strengths drum. And you were one of those leaders who in that space that really helped the culture embrace strengths. So throughout our conversation today, I hope that you'll share some stories of the ways that you've seen individuals and teams react and grow through strengths. But I want to just let our audience know that you've trained literally hundreds and hundreds and hundreds, thousands of individuals in different capacities, of course. You've worked with dozens of teams, dozens of them, and you've carried strengths on even into your personal life and your after hours work whenever you and your wife have done strengths for couples workshops, and your wife is a therapist.
She's a marriage and family therapist here in San Antonio, yeah.
Not only did she love strengths from that point because you hired the housekeeper, that you guys partnered and then began teaching strengths for couples, which is fantastic. So I can't wait to talk about all that. But what I want to also highlight the fact that you are well-versed in a bunch of different personality languages. Tell us what all you are certified in when it comes to languages.
So it's just part of my job. So I work in leadership development. That's the major focus of my work. I run training and development for a manufacturing company, and most of the things that we do enterprise-wide are all kind of leadership development, management training, that kind of thing, right?
Sure.
And the company that I work at now is not really focused on StrengthsFinders, and they're not focused on any one particular framework. And so lots of people use lots of different ones. And so through all the different training programs that we do and different things that I teach, I've just accumulated certifications in Myers-Briggs Type Indicator, FIRO-B, DISC, Influence Style Indicator, insights, e-colors.
Wow, that's a lot.
And I'm working on Hogan right now. So lots of different sort of modalities in getting to personalities and the way that people can maximize working together.
Awesome. Well, since you're an L&D leader, a leader in leadership and development leader, I wanted to touch base with that real quick because most people are familiar with Myers-Briggs and MBTI. I think that's way more well known than StrengthsFinder is. And in my practice as a strengths coach over the last 10 years, most people have asked me, well, what's the difference between StrengthsFinder and MBTI? And I typically say, and I think I probably got this from Gallup, is that Myers-Briggs is more of a generalized view of the way that you interact or negotiate certain situations or your personality. But it's more of a broad brush, which StrengthsFinder is more of a fine tip brush, right? So if you were I like to say this thing, if you were a building, Myers-Briggs would tell you what your framework is, but StrengthsFinder tells you what color the walls are.
Ooh, that's good.
The rug on the floor looks like, what your front door shape is. It's just very detailed. Would you agree with that?
I think for the most part, it does sound like a little bit of Gallup talk, but
well, Gallup Certified Strengths Coach.
It depends on, I think, on the sophistication of the coach with Myers-Briggs and with any one of those frameworks. I'll tell you that the biggest difference for me, and not to say that I think you have a really solid point. The biggest difference for me is just the accessibility. And what I mean by that is that a Myers-Briggs type indicator, you have to have a good coach in order to get you all the information that you need out of that frame. Mm-hmm. With StrengthsFinders, it's there. And I think it's a lot easier for people to understand very quickly. And there's so much detailed and really good information in the reporting that you get. And with a good coach like yourself, it gets even more detailed and a lot more usable. So out of all of the certifications that I have and all the different frameworks that I'm familiar with, StrengthsFinders is my absolute favorite. And when I get approached by a manager or an HR business partner or anyone, an individual, saying that they'd like to do one of these kinds of things, the first one that I suggest is Strengths. And it doesn't really matter what their problem they're trying to solve. I think we'll start with StrengthsFinders because as an individual, that can get you a lot of detailed information very quickly. So that's the difference to me, anyway.
Thanks for sharing that. You and I share this passion about organizational development, and you're building, a wonderful career in organizational development right now. Let's talk about that a little bit. Okay. What was special about the time we worked at Rackspace, and what were some of the components of that organizationally? Obviously, strengths was, but were there other parts that you felt like were core to who we were?
Gosh, I think the first thing that jumped to my mind when you started that question was that, that there was this cultural, at the time, desire and impetus for playing to your strengths. And the fact that when you go into this organization when we joined this organization, we were all taking the assessment, right? And then we became a StrengthsFinder shop. And it's not just that everybody was taking that assessment and you could figure out what your top 5 were. It's that we all believed it was part of our core values and our culture. We believed in putting people in the right position to do the best that they could do, right? That to me was what was really special about that time. So number one, in that it was a top-down approach, right? Our senior leadership believed in StrengthsFinders, and they talked about it. When they came out and they would do these things called open books, right? Where it was basically a town hall meeting for the whole company. And when we do open book, then our CEO at the time, our COO at the time, they would talk about strengths, and they would bring it up as part of the lexicon of the whatever they were discussing, right? That sets that culture apart from other cultures that I have worked in, and then certainly from the culture that I'm in now. The top-down approach, the focus on strengths rather than weaknesses, and the drive for managing people based on their strengths, right? Putting people in the right position to be able to maximize their strengths, I think is what really was special.
Wasn't it? It was almost a value proposition during the hiring process. Right. I mean, I don't think that our recruiting page ever said that you're going to get to play to your strengths. But I think in the hiring process, when you interacted with employees, of Rackspace, many times that message was transferred to the applicant that, we believe in what's best in you. And we told the story of the business we were in from a strength-based perspective, that we're not going to be the leader of the most innovative technology, maybe not even the best, most forward advanced solutions per se, but we are going to be the best in customer service in the technology industry. And so we knew what our strengths were clearly from that perspective. So the overarching story was, we are focusing on being the best customer service company. We want you to be focused on being the best salesperson, account manager, system administrator, network security architect. Right? I mean, that was somewhat of the value proposition.
Yeah, I agree with you.
Talk about how we embedded strengths across the entire employee life cycle.
Right. So, you come in the door and you're, before you come in the door, you're given the assessment, right? So you're given a code to go take the test, and then you get your results. You get your top 5.
Code comes to you when you receive your offer letter.
That's right. So before you walk in the door, before your first day, you're given the code to do this, and you're given a description from your recruiter about what this is all about, but you still don't know, right? And then I remember when I started, I was given a sales test. They give you like an assessment of how good of a salesman you're going to be, because that's the department I was going into, and I was given the StrengthsFinders at the same time. So it wasn't odd to me to be given an assessment, but it was odd to be given a personality assessment, especially after I had gotten the job. And then you go into rookie orientation, and you're there with everybody, and you could be sitting at a table with the new VP of whatever, or next to the person that's going to be the receptionist. So everybody's mixed together, and then you're given an overview of the StrengthsFinders, framework by, the president of the company. Graham Weston, was the guy, and he'd come out and talk about it. So that was really cool. And you and I did it later. But, some expert in StrengthsFinders would come and talk to you about what this thing is. So that was kind of built into your first experience with that culture. Then you go out and everybody's got it hanging all over their desks, right? You got your strengths card hanging at your desk, and you'd know what everybody's top 5 was. You'd hear about it all over the place. People would talk about working on a team and what it's like to be, partnered with this person who has Maximizer, or that person who has responsibility, or whatever it is. We had it put on the back of name badges. We had people, on your name badge, your security badge would have your picture and the year you started at the company, and on the back would be your top 5 strengths.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah. That's right.
I remember a team at one time had the little rubber band, like the Livestrong bands, those rubber wristbands made up with strengths, and so then they would wear them, so you'd have it right away. You'd see the different colors of different strengths on people's wrists.
Yep. Yeah. Onboarding, everyone was onboarded in a similar fashion, and everyone got strengths. Yeah. Let's move to performance management. Let's talk about how you were part of the team and then you helped embed strengths into management.
We did. Gallup offers the Great Managers Training, right? So then we followed a lot of those same principles from Great Managers Training, and one of the things that they would do was guide you through an assessment, where guide you through a questionnaire that you would go with an individual.
Yeah, a coaching interview, right?
Yeah, exactly. So, and then in that questionnaire, in that interview, it's guiding you through asking your direct report, what are your top 5 strengths? What are the 2 that you feel like are most valuable to you? How do you utilize them? And then in that conversation, it goes from understanding what your strengths are to aiming your strengths and how are you going to utilize them. So we coached managers to manage people through their strengths.
Yeah, and I think about also during the performance review cycle, we would help out managers by putting in our HRIS, our system. Whenever you printed out the report or the review to be used during a performance review, we would embed the person's and employee's strengths onto that form so that the manager didn't have to go searching for it. It was sitting right there. And we had the philosophy of spend more than half of your performance review focusing on the positive things, the things that are going well, the strengths. And if you could tie connections to the great work you see them doing with the strengths they have in their top 5.
Right. And if there were opportunities that were brought up, then the conversation would be about, okay, so this is the opportunity. Identify now which of your strengths are you going to use to overcome that opportunity, or how are you going to capitalize on that? Yeah. Identifying what weaknesses do we need to manage.
When I think about team building, so lots of team building in a growing organization that does a lot of organizational change, because they're growing, right? So grow and split for teams and moving things around. We utilized StrengthsFinder in building teams. You want to talk a little bit about how we did that?
So in team strengths sessions, or in team strengths sort of interventions, what we call them, we would coach managers to take a look at what you have in the layout of your team with respect to strengths. And so you guide the conversation in looking for partnerships. Well, first of all, asking, what do you do well? What do you need? What does the team do well? And then what mechanisms should you keep in place in order to maintain that positive work? And then where are some blind spots for the team based on the strengths of the team as a whole? Where are some blind spots or things or opportunities? And then based on what you have on the team, the layout or the landscape of the strengths on your team, who are you going to put in what places and positions in order to overcome those obstacles or overcome those blind spots? So it was the conversation in team strengths and also the coaching of managers around strengths was all about putting people in the right place in order to be successful.
You really described it from the manager's point of view, because you're such the coach of managers, but I think about the value of individual contributors who get the insight of just listening to their teammates talking about their strengths in a team session. We spent many hours in training rooms with teams and just facilitating a really great strengths conversation about how these strengths manifest themselves in you. And the gained insight typically built trust and lowered conflict on those teams, because you could see through the lens for a moment, even, just see through the lens of how this person's strengths are manifesting themselves into you. And then it immediately applies when you head out of that training room and you go back to the cubicle or back to your location and you see it in action and you say, now I see why you're asking me these questions. You've got deliberative and I didn't bring enough information. So I think that, one thing that worked very well for us for team formation and team building is to start from that strengths language and to equip people with the strengths language so they could call it when they saw it, right? Working with you, I could see your positivity and I could love it or hate it for what it was worth. Because, I'd be frustrated with the building burning down and you're like, Kathy, it's fine. You can still walk. You've got 2 legs. You're fine. You're healthy. Everything's fine.
I think the phrase was, there's no such thing as an engagement emergency.
That's true.
Yeah.
And I sort of felt like some of them were emergencies. And you could get frustrated with my input and how I saved everything and constantly was trying to show you something from 2007. You would put it in your filing cabinet for me, also known as your trash can. But, my input wanted to collect and be resourceful. But that language really, instead of me calling you Pollyanna outlook and you calling me a pack rat, I called it positivity.
Yeah, without a doubt. And lots of times as an engagement team, we'd be working with teams that were broken, teams that were having some problems and not getting along. And the managers would ask us to come in to intervene. And gosh, how many times would we, it would be about a couple of people on the team that would have responsibility and then a few people that don't. And then the disparity in workload that would manifest out of that. And so we'd have to have them realize that this is about responsibility. It's not about you being a jerk, or they being a jerk. It's about, you as a responsibility, you're taking on more because you're driven toward that.
Yeah, you're hardwired to, with awareness, gains responsibility. So you end up filling your plate full of tasks and responsibilities. When someone who sees their jobs with much clearer boundaries, right? Who doesn't have responsibility in their top 5. They see their job, they see their world with clearer boundaries where they're not responsible for someone else's work, where someone with responsibility in their top 5 does feel the desire, the yearning to go take on more because they believe it needs to be done.
Exactly. And so that scenario would come up all the time. There would be other scenarios between woo and relator, where, relator people see woo as disingenuous and woo people see relator people as snobby. And so then, these divisions would come up. So lots of different opportunities to, when you see teams aren't getting along, to look at those issues through the lens of strengths. And then all of a sudden, it's a more objective view. And it takes the emotion out of it. It gives them a language to use that's not quite so emotional, and it's not about finger pointing. It's about really understanding each other and where you're coming from. And so we'd solve a lot of problems that way too.
Yeah. We really did start a fire of strengths, a strengths fire at Rackspace, and we saw it grow, and even outside the walls of Rackspace. Let's talk about things you remember and things that you loved about doing strengths outside of Rackspace, but was enabled by Rackspace.
Okay, so the first one that comes when you say that's Graham Weston. That's Graham is going around the town doing all the things that Graham is into, and then so he would meet a nonprofit, or he'd meet a group of people, and he'd say, you know what, you need to do strengths. Call my strengths people over there at Rackspace. So we'd get a phone call from a nonprofit to go out and do a strengths session, or do an introduction to strengths with whomever. So I remember
the Chamber of Commerce.
Yeah.
Nonprofit.
It was City Year. I remember we did a lot of work with City Year. We did with the Hispanic Chamber. I did something with the Soos engineering group. Just like people, organizations in the community that we felt like we could partner with. Then that's what we would do. We would go support them with StrengthsFinders.
Yes, there was actually a theme there for a while of any Rackspace employee that was sitting on a board of a nonprofit. In many cases, we received invitations to go work with the board of directors of that nonprofit and to do some strengths work with them. Yeah. Because once a manager or a leader gets the taste of strengths and sees how useful the tool can be in their management toolkit, it's hard to be a part of a group or a team without seeing the strengths lens, because you want to know, what is your top 5 and what is this person's top 5, and I got to see all the details of each person's strengths. So yes,
that is true. I remember we worked with a middle school. We started to do some work with a middle school that's local, right over there by the headquarters, and then we had their principal and a select group of teachers come in, and we ran them through some StrengthsFinders too.
We did. That was the culture project with that group. I remember, and they loved that information. They loved receiving it and knowing those things about each other. We used it with youth. So I remember one year, I believe it was pretty early on, like 2007, 2008 time period, when we started out a tech kids camp, and we brought middle school kids for 1 week to Rackspace, and they got to job shadow a ton of different roles throughout the company, and we taught them some really technical things, like a little bit of coding and a little bit of software development type stuff. And then we added on a layer of strengths, and we used the Strengths Explorer for that, which was pretty cool, because that gave the parents, Rackspace, these were Rackspace kids, their parents were working at Rackspace. So the Rackspace mom or dad had the top 5, and the kids had their top 3 from Strengths Explorer. So that really fostered a connection there. We thought that was really fun as well.
Yeah.
Talk a little bit about Strengths for Couples.
So Strengths for Couples,
what was it? What did we do?
It was born out of discussions that I was having at home with my wife. So she's a licensed marriage and family therapist. At the time, a majority of her business was couples, married couples, and people that were coupled up for one reason or another, or whatever people get coupled up for. And so I'm talking about strengths, coming home from Rackspace and talking about StrengthsFinders, and then she read the book and she got her top 5 and started exploring it a little bit herself, and then she realized that she could really help out that same conversation we were just discussing with teams that were having issues. The same thing can happen between a couple, right? Where you've got, one person has the analytical and the other one doesn't. And the analytical is always trying to shoot holes in the other one's ideas, right? And so she would have them take the assessment. She would give them the books, they'd get their top 5, and then they would come back in and talk about the same problems through the lens of strengths. And all of a sudden, again, takes the emotion out of it, gives them a different language to use, and then things are moving along and starting to solve some problems. So she started seeing the value in StrengthsFinders in her work. So we just kind of put these things together. And I was teaching a lot of classes in Introduction to Strengths and Team Strengths and Management-based Strengths and all of that. And so we got together one weekend. And it was actually, we were I think it was an anniversary weekend, or maybe it was a birthday, and we were staying at a hotel somewhere, and we hung out in the hotel bar, and we wrote this class. So that's where we put it together. I think it was at the Valencia in San Antonio. Oh. So then we offered it up to Rackers and Rackspace employees and their significant others to bring them in after hours. And then we bought them dinner, and then we made it kind of this dinner and a show kind of a thing. And so
you were the show part. Your positivity woo was definitely the show part. In just a second, because what listeners need to know is that once most employees got out of StrengthsFinder class, like some level of training, either with strengths, the onboarding class or one of the offset classes that Ron just talked about, they would say, man, I really wish I knew this about my spouse. Mm-hmm. And we heard that feedback all the time. Like, where can I get a top 5 code so that I can give it to my wife or my husband, etc. So that's all swirling in your mind. Mm-hmm. And he's starting to outline what we did in the class. But what I want the listeners to know is that out of all the after hours curricular, like after hours classes that we offered, Strengths for Couples was by far the most successful.
Oh my gosh, yes.
People signed, there was a wait list every single month. Mm-hmm. You held it once a month. People would sign up. It would sell out because you could only accommodate, 30 people or something, like
so
15
couples.
Right. Because we fed them dinner and wine and all that good junk. So, it was kind of an expense that the company paid for, but it would sell out within minutes. Mm-hmm. People would go in and reserve their tickets to go to Strengths for Couples. It was so popular. Yeah. And it really was good, good publicity for us because we were bringing in people from outside Rackspace to come in and do this too. So there were lots of people who have a very fond memory of coming to Rackspace with their spouse who was a Racker and getting a little bit of that culture Kool-Aid that you and I love to sell. So go ahead. So what did you say? You made dinner?
So we brought dinner and then just made it a fun event for them. And what was really fun, it was obviously really fun to teach the class with my wife, and it really has these two components to it. It's the first part of it is about introduction to strengths, like what is this framework, and I would handle that, and then we go to Jennifer's piece, and what she would do is she had using John Gottman's theory, right, which is a marriage and family guru. These 7 steps of success in any kind of marriage, and so we'd take those 7 steps and then talk about how we can use strengths to bolster up those 7 steps. That's what it was all about, and still is. In fact, we still teach that class. We still get a lot of a good traction out of it. But people seeing those two things kind of put together really enjoyed it. And what was really cool to me over time as we did that is that it was used and utilized by all different sort of walks of life. We had some couples in there that had been married for 40 years, and lots of that were married, for 2 or 3 years. And so it was how do you get to know each other in the first part of marriage, and then how can you sort of explain some of the things that you already know about your spouse from 40 years of marriage. We had all different types of relationships in there. Mm-hmm. We never got a first date. That was my big goal.
That would be kind of weird to be a first date.
I don't want to go out with you, but here, take this test. But we did have some people that were very, very new in relationships, like on the 3rd or 4th date. So that was really cool too.
Did you ever have any people meet someone else in their class?
No.
Just kidding.
No, I did not.
That wouldn't have been a very good, successful class. Well, it was a very popular one, and it's one example that I love to share whenever I'm talking with other organizations who are thinking about how can we embed strengths. I always mention, think about the after hours, really, because many times a lot of our strengths work done after hours really helped people inside the company embrace it even more.
Yeah.
So Ron, there's this idea, right? There's these lies we believe culturally that make strengths a little bit unconventional, this strengths focus. And one of them is that we all believe in being well-rounded, that being well-rounded is the strength, when in actuality, well-rounded means that you're not focusing on strengths, right?
Right. I think, so I mentioned this, that's the epiphany that I had, when I joined Rackspace and Graham gave that talk, that was if I think about the way that I've been parented, coached, managed my whole life, it's all a bit about, Ron, you're not good at this. You're good. You're fine here, right? You're good at these things. And so let's put that aside. Now let's focus on where you're not so good and bring you up, bring that level up to the others. And that was the epiphany that I had when StrengthsFinder was first exposed to that. That is literally, like you said, those are the lies that we believe. Strengths is so unconventional, quote unquote, because conventional wisdom has been so much about getting better at the things that you suck at. Mm-hmm. Marcus Buckingham is kind of a strengths guru, right? Most people have heard of him. He likes to quote this study that Gallup did, where a group of parents is given a report card, and a simulated report card, and they're asked, your kid gets an A in English and an A in science and an A or an F in math. Where are you going to focus your attention? And they're not asked to choose just one, but 80% of them will choose that F, right? Focus all your attention on that F. And it makes sense. That's the way we were all brought up, right? It makes absolute sense. That's what parents would say. But StrengthsFinders is different than that. It's that let's focus on those A's and B's and figure out a way to drop math.
Yeah.
Figure out a way to get that out of our life. And I think that's different. And it's also hard. There's a certain amount of guilt that I think people will have. I know I did when I think about my weakness of discipline, for example, organization, structure, predictability. I don't like it. I never have. I've never been into it. I was in the military, for crying out loud, and it was really hard for me that part of the life. But that would be the thing that people will tell me. You got to be more organized. You got to put stuff in a row, and you got to prioritize. Do your big rocks first. All that stuff that I've learned how to do is still really, really hard work for me. And in order to let go of that and allow other people around me to be the disciplined people, to be the organized people, that does bring a little bit of guilt. And
it's hard as a culture. Think about embedding that philosophy into an entire culture, because what we're saying is, I think conventional wisdom tells us you have to eliminate your weaknesses, right? Have no weaknesses. That's the goal, to do not have any weaknesses. And to be a strength-based culture, you have to embrace strengths and also be okay with the fact be okay with the fact that you're going to have weaknesses. And there's a vulnerability element there that not everybody is able to accept. Would you say?
Yeah, absolutely true. Absolutely true. And when I join a work group right now, a new team, the first thing I get, and I have everybody communicate, is here's what I bring to the team, and here's what I need from the team. And you get the best of me in these kinds of circumstances, and you get the worst of me in these kinds of circumstances. And I think if people could be honest about those things, and you're right, it does take a little bit of vulnerability because you're admitting that you're not good at something. But if people can be honest about that stuff right away, then you're on the fast track to efficiency for that team. Mm-hmm. You're going through storming, norming, and forming, and then very, very quickly.
Oh, I love your L&D mind. Storming, norming, and forming.
I think that's not the right order.
That's not the right order. It's forming, forming, storming, norming, performing.
Yeah, something like that.
I've read that book. That's awesome. Oh, I love it. Well, this has been great. I ask all of my, I want one last thing. If there were an L&D leader who came to you and said, hey, how do I start out on this strengths journey for my organization?
Mm-hmm.
How do I embed it? Or maybe I'm starting an organization. What do I need to do? Like, what activities do you think I need to do in order to embed this well within an organization? What would you say? One
of the luxuries that we had working at Rackspace is that, it was built in, and the senior leadership was really into this stuff, right? It made it easy for us to have a strengths culture there because it was top down. I guess one of the things that is frustrating for me now in my work at the organization I'm in is that there is no one system, right? There's no one framework that everybody knows about and follows, and I wish that there were. But what I'm trying to do is kind of go in two different directions at once. And what I mean by that is I do team interventions using StrengthsFinders. I do individual coaching based with StrengthsFinders. I'm trying to incorporate StrengthsFinders into some of the leadership development work that we do. So I have some influence there where I can choose StrengthsFinders as the modality that we're going to use when we talk about these kinds of things. That's one way to do it. And then at the other side of the top, you got to get to the top. You got to bring in the senior leadership of the company and convince them that this is the right way to go. And I think if you talk to most senior leaders of any organization, big or small, it's all about like, how do we build efficiencies? How do we, build business acumen? How do we get to increasing our bottom line faster? You can draw some very clear lines between employee engagement and all of those business results. We believe that employee engagement, more engaged employees are going to give you more intrinsic value. They're going to give more to their jobs, and that's going to help the bottom line. And there's lots of research that shows that engagement is important, and you read up on Gallup, and they could tell you all about it. So if you believe that, and you can talk to the management about that, and they believe that same thing too, then the line it's pretty easy to make. Then you're talking about success, on the bottom line. Business success comes from engagement, and how do we engage people? Well, we put them in the right role, and give them an opportunity to be successful as successful as they can in the role that they're in. And then what's the best way to do that? Give people StrengthsFinders, right? Give managers the tool of StrengthsFinders so that they can have those conversations and they can be really smart about how they're building their teams from an organizational development standpoint. So then you got it from top to bottom, right? You make the connections from a grassroots standpoint where you're working with StrengthsFinders, and then you've got the top of the house believing that if we do strengths, then we're going to get engagement and we're going to have a better bottom line. So having those conversations as best you can is the best way to do it.
My business and my consulting business, I'm usually brought in at that executive level leader, and my goal for my work with any organization, even if I'm just doing a executive team session around strengths and understanding what each leader brings to the table, my goal for that session, my personal goal, is to have such a quality conversation that those leaders can't resist taking that same conversation down to their level, where they are to their direct reports and understanding their strengths, and then that cascade effect that happens throughout the entire organization. That's if I were to say there's one great way to embed strengths, is by creating promoters at every single team session and starting at the top and working your way down. Yeah. But I think, that would be ideal, right? I think there's so much to be said about reminding people about strengths and keeping it visible. You mentioned putting strengths on name tags, right? And security badges. We also had signage on our cubicles, but there are other ways to keep strengths visible and out and open. I think one thing that you did that was fantastic was to put a strength of the week. Was it of the week or the day on the intranet? So whenever anyone pulled up their browser and you saw the corporate website, intranet website, right there in the center, and a very small, but it was still there. It had real estate around announcements. What were the strength of the week or the strength of the day? And you just filtered through all 34 of the strengths and gave the short description of each one. So many people, I heard people say like, I was reminded about what input meant today. And I see it totally in you. Or, did you see that? Did you see adaptability? That's totally me. And that's why I'm, I was reminded today. That was perfect. There were conference rooms at Rackspace that had strengths on the windows as part of a covering and decoration that reminded people of number one, the strengths language, but also the definition. So that was like keeping it visible. Yeah.
And you also mentioned performance management earlier as well. The fact that we'd had that built into our performance management process. Man, if you could get there, then that's gold, right? Because then at least 2 times a year, if people are sitting in their mid-year review or their end-of-year review, or however often it happens, then it's coming back top of mind.
Oh, I'm so grateful to you for sharing all of your strength stories with us. And it's always fun to be around Mr. Positivity Woo. Hey, if I ask all of my podcast guests this question, this podcast is called Obey Your Strengths, not Play to Your Strengths. And the reason why that comes from that, those of us who have really embraced this language and gone deeply in reflection of our own manifestations of how these things happen to us, these strengths, not how they can come from within. They're connected to how we get things done and why we do the things we do, just as much as what we do, how we bring them to work. Tell me, is there a certain story that you could share where you have learned rather than your strengths were something to be obeyed rather than something just to be played?
Man, I guess one that comes to mind is, for me, adaptability. And that one is my drive to keep things fresh and keep things, different and exciting. And if I don't make changes to my routine, if I don't, make these small sort of, to outside people wouldn't even notice them. Like I mentioned earlier, driving different ways to work or things like that, right? Rearranging my desk, rearranging the furniture in my house, stuff like that. If I don't do that, then that adaptability will build up, and then it will manifest in some sort of evil change that I'm going to do on everybody around me. So as a manager of people, I have to be very careful about understanding that other people don't like change done to them. So if what I do is I do these small incremental changes in my routine so that I don't get an urge to just blow up the whole organization and start from scratch like I want to do sometimes.
That's a great story. Well, thank you, Ron Soos, for being here today. Maybe you can come back in a future episode and share more of your depth, and maybe you can bring your wife.
Oh, that would be great. Yeah.
Awesome.
I love that. Thanks for having me.
Thank you, Ron.
To learn more about Kathy Kersten, visit her website, kathykersten.com. That's KathyKersten.com. Obey Your Strengths is produced by Geekdom Media in association with Gameday Media Enterprises. Executive produced by Lorenzo Gomez, John Garcia, and Michael Argent.